In a small city, lived a man named Charles and his wife, Sophia, with 2 sons, Richard and Austin. To the outside world, they seemed like the perfect couple, but within the walls of their home, a different story unfolded. Charles was well-to-do before, but lost his job due to the company closed up as a result of financial crisis. He ended up doing any kind of street job to get busy, until he finds a suitable job. While Sophia was the one financially supporting the family from the little business she does. Charles's friend, Linus, who lives in the same compound with him, came to his house. Due to the fear of what Charles's wife will do to him, he didn't allow his friend to enter the house. They sat somewhere in the compound to discuss. Linus asked, "Charles, will you join us for the meeting tonight?" Charles smiled weakly. "I can't, I have some work to finish at home." Linus asked, "Sophia keeps you busy, doesn't she?" Charles nervously laughed and said, "Yes, she does." After their discussion, Charles entered the house quietly. Sophia was in the living room, waiting to question him. Sophia said, "Where have you been, Charles?" Charles replied, "I was just talking to Linus, my friend." Sophia frowned. "You waste too much time gossiping. Did you finish the chores I gave you?" Charles said, "Not yet, but I'll do them now." Sophia stood up, her voice was rising. "You're always so slow. I can't rely on you for anything." Charles lowered his head and quickly moved to start the chores, hoping to avoid further anger. As he moved to the kitchen, Sophia followed. Her voice was dripping with disdain. Sophia said, "Look at this place. It's filthy. You can't even keep the house clean." Charles replied, "I was going to clean it now, Sophia." Sophia said angrily, "Going to? You should have done it already. Do I have to do everything around here?" Charles scrubbed the floor while Sophia stood over him, her eyes critical and cold. She kicked a bucket of water towards him. Sophia said, "Clean faster. We don't have all day." Charles cleaned as fast as he could, trying to avoid her wrath. As he finished, Sophia sneered. Sophia said, "Pathetic. I could have done a better job myself." Charles moved to the next task, and his heart was heavy with dread. Dinner was a tense affair. Charles served Sophia and their children, Richard and Austin, with practiced care. Sophia's critical eye watched his every move. Richard asked, "Mom, can I have more stew?" Sophia answered, "Of course, my dear." Charles served him more stew. Charles carefully spooned more stew into Richard's bowl, but his hand trembled slightly. Sophia noticed and snapped at him. Sophia said, "Charles, be careful. You're so clumsy." Charles replied, "Sorry, Sophia." A moment of silence followed, but it didn't last long. Charles reached for the bread, his movements slow and deliberate. Austin asked, "Dad, can you pass the bread?" Charles reached for the bread, but as he does, his hand brushed a glass, nearly tipping it over. Sophia's eyes flashed with anger. Sophia said, "Charles, you can't even pass the bread without making a mess." Charles replied, "Sorry, Sophia." Sophia said, "Sorry. That's all you ever say. You're useless." Charles continued to eat in silence, and his appetite was gone. The children exchanged worried glances, their eyes flicking between their parents. After dinner, Richard asked, "Mom, can we go to the cinema tomorrow?" Sophia answered, "Only if your father finishes all the chores on time. But don't get your hopes up. After Charles put the children to bed, he and Sophia sat in the living room. The tension was palpable. Sophia reviewed a list she made earlier. Sophia said, "Did you finish all the work I assigned?" Charles replied, "Yes, Sophia. Everything is done." Sophia scoffed, "Good. But don't think this means you can relax. There's always more to do. You know I can't stand laziness." Charles nodded, and his eyes was downcast. Sophia's voice became harsh. Sophia said, "And don't even think about spending time with your friends. You have responsibilities here." Charles replied, "Yes, Sophia." Sophia said, "And another thing, I saw how you were talking to Linus the other day. Don't think I didn't notice." Charles replied, "We were just discussing about general things and our upcoming meeting." Sophia said, "I don't care. You spend too much time talking to your friends. Remember your place." Charles felt a surge of frustration but suppressed it, knowing any retort would only make things worse. He retreated to his room, with the weight of his circumstances. The next day, Charles visited his friend Linus, looking for a moment of peace. Linus said, "Charles, you look tired. Is everything alright?" Charles sighed, "It's Sophia. She's very demanding." Linus said, "Charles, you don't have to endure this alone. Have you talked to anyone about it, like your family members?" Charles replied, "No. What would people think? A man admitting his wife is, well, it's shameful." Linus said, "There's no shame in seeking help, Charles. Promise me you'll think about it." Charles nodded, but the weight of societal expectations and his own fear made him hesitant to take action. He knew something must change, but he doesn't know how to start. Days turned into weeks, and Sophia's behavior became increasingly abusive. One evening, after a particularly harsh argument, Sophia's anger exploded. Sophia said, "You can't do anything right. You're useless." Charles replied, "Sophia, please, I'm trying." Sophia shouted at him and said, "Trying isn't good enough." The children, Richard and Austen, witnessed the scene and rushed to their father. Richard said, "Mom, stop. Don't hurt Dad." Austen said, "Leave him alone." Sophia turned her rage towards the children, but Charles stepped in front of them, shielding them with his body. Charles said, "No more, Sophia. You won't hurt them. Just because you are the one providing for the family now, doesn't mean you will treat me anyhow you want." The next morning, Charles took Richard and Austen to his father's house, Mr. Thomas, to seek help. Charles approached his father's compound, and his children was holding his hands tightly. Charles said, "Father, I need your help. Sophia has been hurting us, especially me." Mr. Thomas said, "Charles, my son, this must be really serious. But first, tell me everything that has been happening." Charles started talking. "Sophia, she's been verbally and physically abusive. She criticizes everything I do, and nothing I do is ever good enough for her. Last night, she struck me again, and the children saw it all." Richard said, "Yes, Granddad, Mom gets very angry. She yells at Dad and sometimes she hits him." Austen said, "Dad tries to protect us from her, but Mom gets really mad." Mr. Thomas sighed deeply. "This is a serious matter, Charles, my son. No one should live in fear. I and some elders will visit your house and confront Sophia. We must address this immediately." You and the children can stay here while we handle this. Charles nodded, grateful for what his father said. Mr. Thomas, accompanied by an elder, went to Charles's house to confront Sophia. Mr. Thomas and the elder approached Sophia, who is in the yard, her face initially surprised to see them. Mr. Thomas said, "Sophia, we need to talk." Sophia defensively said, "Oh, father-in-law, what is it about?" Mr. Thomas said, "My son has told us about the abuse. This must stop. You will face the village council for your actions." Sophia replied, "He's lying. I've done nothing wrong." Linus was also sitting outside when the elders arrived at the compound. Linus said, "We've been seeing you bully your husband in this compound, Sophia. You cannot deny it." Mr. Thomas said, "My son is not alone in this. The children have also confirmed what has been happening. This behavior is unacceptable." Sophia replied angrily, "He can't even take care of simple chores. He's lazy and useless." Mr. Thomas said, "Sophia, no one deserves to be treated this way, regardless of their abilities. He has been providing for the family. Just because he had a little financial challenge, that's why you maltreated him and turned him into your house help. Your actions are harmful and must be addressed." Sophia was taken to the village by her father-in-law and the elder to face the village council. The council met to discuss the situation and decide on appropriate measures to ensure the safety of Charles and the children. Mr. Andrew, one of the elders, said, "Sophia, your actions have caused great harm to your family. This behavior will not be tolerated." Mr. Titus, another elder, said, "We must ensure that Charles and the children are safe and that you receive the punishment you need to change your ways." Sophia began to cry. "I didn't realize how much damage I was causing. Please, forgive me." Mr. Thomas said, "Admitting your faults is good, Sophia, but you will receive your punishment first, before we talk about forgiveness. And don't forget, we will monitor your progress. In the meantime, Charles and the children will go back to the house while you will stay in this village with me." The village council agreed that Sophia will stay in the village and farm for each elder for 3 months. She will only be forgiven if she completes her punishment successfully. Mr. Thomas and Sophia came back from the meeting, and Sophia went straight to the room ashamed. Mr. Thomas told his son the decision the village council made. Charles was feeling sorry for his wife but decided not to react. If that's what will get Sophia to come back to her right senses, she should do what the village council said. Charles said, "Thank you, Father." Mr. Thomas replied, "You are strong, my son. Thank you for not beating your wife at any point. You took a very good decision by bringing the matter to my notice. I and my children will be going back to the city tomorrow," Charles said. "That's fine. If you need anything, don't fail to let me know," Mr. Thomas said. Charles nodded in agreement. 2 months later, Charles and his children were thriving. He got a new job and was able to take care of his children, while his wife was still in the village serving her punishment. Richard said, "Dad, I like how peaceful our home is now." Charles said, "Yes, my son. We are safe and free. Though your mom may be coming back in a month's time. Granddad informed me that she is behaving well now. So, I have forgiven her for everything she did to me." Austin said, "You have a good heart, Dad. We are proud of you." Charles said, "And I'm proud of you both." After 3 months, the elders gathered for a meeting. Sophia has finished serving her punishment. Mr. Thomas said, "Sophia, You have completed your punishment and have shown genuine remorse for your actions. It is time for you to return home and seek forgiveness from your husband, Charles. Sophia said, "Thank you, my father-in-law. I have learned from my mistakes and I'm ready to make amends." Sophia arrived at her home, where Charles was waiting. The children, Richard and Austen, watched from a distance, curious and hopeful. Sophia approached Charles, and her eyes was filled with regret. Sophia said, "My husband, I am truly sorry for the pain I have caused you and our family. I let my anger and frustration control me, and I hurt you deeply. I have realized my mistakes and I promise to do better, to be a better wife and mother. Please, forgive me." Charles looked at Sophia, his face a mixture of emotions. He took a deep breath, stepped closer and embraced her. Charles replied, "Sophia, your words mean a lot to me. I can see that you are genuinely sorry. It has been difficult for all of us, but I believe in second chances. I forgive you, and I hope we can move forward together as a family." Sophia's eyes filled with tears of relief. She reached out and embraced Charles, who held her tightly. Domestic abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of gender. No one should suffer in silence. If you or someone you know is in a similar situation, seek help and remember that you are not alone. Thank you for watching. If you found this video entertaining, please consider giving it a like and leaving a comment below to let us know your thoughts. Please, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.